Hello, so in this episode, we're going to talk about all things finance, of course, but more importantly, we're going to talk about the market because you've got to, as an investor, you've got to be aware of what's happening in the market, what's going on in the economy. And one thing I always talk about is when I first get started in property at a young age, of the age of 19, and I don't know if you guys have a similar, story to mine here, but I never understood and what a recession actually meant, because I get started pre 2008. And it's not until after the fact when you start to understand that property has cycles. There's different types of cycles and how that affects lending and what's going on in the economy and what's happening in the US. And does that have a direct reflection to the UK? And what's everything that's happening with the Bank of England base rate? Like all of these things in the start of my property journey, I didn't really pay attention to it. But when I started to understand it, and see how finance and money moved, then I started to understand, this is like having the slight edge of being able to understand where the market's going, and really start to see what my next move would be. So it'd be good to hear you guys' thoughts, mainly if we just rewind back to the chaos that erupted September last year with the whole mini budget. Let's have a little chat around that because we're
We
still
have to.
having because we're still having some of the aftershock effects from that. And then with the US almost defaulting recently too as well, what does that actually mean? And what does that also reflect in terms of finance and how lenders price things in? It'd be good to have a chat around that.
Mhm.
So let's start with the
You
mini
want to
budget.
talk about it?
The one thing.
I'm going for therapy after this one.
Do
Yeah.
you know what's crazy about this here is that Liz Truss had an opportunity to say nothing, not call for a mini budget,
Yeah.
just because the idea behind the kind of tax breaks and a few other things that she was planning was sound in theory. It was just because it was unfunded. They had no idea where that money was going to come from other than having to borrow it, which then sent the global economy looking at the UK. Are they stable enough? What's going to happen there?
Yeah, I think she was just lining herself up as a modern day Maggie Thatcher, wasn't she? But without the forethought of how do we execute this plan, because there's no doubt about it. What they were trying to do, there's merit in it working, but not in that way.
Yeah.
Not secretly. Oh, let's not tell anyone how we're going to do it. But this is what we're going to do. And then So what? If someone scares you, what do? You jump back, don't you? So the markets went, fuck. What? How are they doing it? Where's it going to go? And confidence just collapsed, and that's why we started to see mortgages being pulled in hours. We were getting emails at work at 3:20 saying you need to put the application in for this rate because it's going at 3:00. It's like, well, so you're giving us minus 20 minutes to do something. And it was just carnage. Rates shot right up. But underlying, there was no real reason for that other than the mess the mini budget sent out. And as we know, Jeremy Hunt came in, basically undid the whole thing, give or take the minor points. And we slowly wound back out of it to the point where a few weeks ago, it was like pre-mini budget conditions in the markets. But however, we have seen inflation stick around a bit longer and a bit higher than what they expected. So we've recently seen a little bit of a nudge up again in the rates because of the repricing and a bit of a higher base rate for maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I don't think that they should be going that way, but that's another conversation. But I would imagine that we're going to see over the next few months a settling again. Inflation starts to ease, and again, then the rates start to come down. So I think the biggest question we get from clients are always, no matter whether it's today, yesterday, last year, or the decade before, or the decade before that, what should I have? Should I have a fixed rate? Should I have a tracker? Should I have a 2-year fixed, a 3-year fixed, a 5-year fixed, 7-year fixed, 10-year fixed? And that's the big question that people want to know.
Maybe give us both your perspectives on that, because I think that's where I saw a lot of the knee-jerk reaction to everything that happened with the mini budget, because rightly so, lenders were pulling their products and new products coming to the market were obviously had rate increases, but a lot of people were trying to jump out of their term to try and fix in a a longer fixed period because everyone at that time thought that interest rates were going to skyrocket and everything was going to cost a lot more. In fact, Martin Lewis, which let's not get into because unfortunately 90% of things he talks about I kind of disagree in. I guess he's trying to mean good, but sometimes. Anyway, we'll not go down that route. But even he was jumping on it, making everything more dramatic than it is. And it looked like a bit of a when things figured itself out and stuff started to ease again, as if that it wasn't as dramatic as what everyone thought it was going to be. So this is where we need to be careful with a lot of people making that knee-jerk reaction. And I guess that's where people are asking, should it be a 5 year? Should it be 2 years? Should it be doing this? So I think that'd be good to get a bit of context behind it.
Yeah. Who's going on? Who's going first on?
Well, I'll say that it did panic me as well. And I had some buy-to-let products that were coming up for renewal. And at the same time, I was having a conversation with somebody that we both know that was a derivatives trader, clever lad. And he was panicking because of what he's got exposure to and what he was reading. And just saying, like, I don't know how buy-to-let can work anymore. And the buy-to-let rates are going to be 10%, some people are saying, and all this. And I was thinking at the time, just from my own personal situation, well, I've been offered these 5-year fix with the lender that I'm with to do a product transfer. Shall I take them? Shall I take a gamble on the variable rate or the tracker rate? And in the end, I went with the sort of slightly cautious approach of, well, what I'll do is I'll leave 2 on the trackers and I'll fix 2 in for 5 years because they were like just under 5%. I thought I'll go with that. They still wash their faces, But there was a lot of panic, and even from supposedly smart people, economists and the like, saying where rates are going to go. I'm not surprised people were pulling their hair out. And we saw the interest rates, the lender interest rates, go from what in the 4s for buy-to-lets to 6.5, 7s. The more specialist rates, 8s, 9, and some products just weren't. Some projects, just weren't working on that. And I think with anything like this, it's easy to just jump and make a decision quick, but sometimes you've got to sit back and just think, right, okay, let's pause for a moment, let the panic settle for a bit, and now let's make a decision. Because in a lot of these situations, the worst case rarely happens. It's normally not quite so bad. I know there's examples, other counter to that, but in most cases, we can hold off a little bit. Unfortunately, not long after, the market settled, didn't they, and the rates were coming down. But the stress tests were quite a challenge in the buy-to-let sector, I must say.
Can you explain more for those that maybe are not aware? What's the stress test and why that's important, especially when it comes to funding?
Yeah, so the stress test is, we talked on a previous podcast about how if you've not got an income, some lenders in the buy-to-let sector aren't bothered about your personal income, they're more bothered about the rental income that property can achieve. So what they do is they apply, besides the loan to value, so the percentage you borrow against a property's value, they'll look at how that rent stresses in relation to the interest rate. So they might say, for example, we're going to apply a margin of 125% coverage against an interest rate at 6% or 7% or 8%. And if they're applying a higher rate of interest, so if it's like an 8% rate, and that rent needs to be 125% coverage of the interest-only payment at a rate of 8%, on a lot of properties, you're going to struggle to get 75% loan to value out of that property. When historically, over the last decade or so, they've been stressed at 5.5% or 5% or whatever. So that's why investors were particularly worried in the buy-to-let sector, especially those in the south. So London and the southeast, where yields aren't as high. In Scotland, of course, and in northwest England, and generally in the north, you get a stronger yield on your property. So the stress tests can go up and it doesn't impact you as much. So I think people were panicking because they were getting to the end of their product thinking, I'm not able to pull any equity out, or I'm not able to change my mortgage over to switch my product onto a lower rate. I'm at the mercy of these rates that are going up and up and up.
Yeah. And then your take as well, Paul, much similar?
Yeah, well, you see, I put all mine on 5-year fixed rates in February last year.
Foresight.
Around 2.5%, so, yeah. No, I did. just because I started to see things after many years of rates being so low. I mean, Christ, what we're putting residential rates out at 1.8, 0.9%.
Yeah, less than 1%.
And obviously that environment been around for quite some time, and things were just, this is pre-mini budget, yeah, things were just starting to creep, and I thought, I've got more of a long-term view on portfolio, so I thought I'm happy with 5-year fixed. So that's what I talk about. Yeah, look, there's always a little bit of guesswork, so I'll be a bit, obviously I'm brilliant, but let's be serious. There is a little bit of guesswork, but I find people, they tend to oversimplify the decision. And that might sound a bit, how can you oversimplify something? And it's like, well, I need a fixed or a tracker. And, you know, like Steve says, you don't have to react straight away. But what you can do is you can look at, if you can be bothered, or you just rely on a broker who, you know, I'm constantly in the office looking at the swap rates, and, you know, they move all the time, but they move in very tiny amounts. But when you start to see them start to move consistently one direction, or then you kind of see what's about to come on the shelf, if you like, because that's the price that the lenders are paying in effect.
So explain a bit more of what the swap rate is and why that could be an indicator of things to come.
Sure, yeah. So lending's not quite as simple as this for banks, but look, how long do we want to listen to this? But the underlying swap rate is really what the banks are paying for them to borrow the money and then lend it out. So simple equation. If it starts to cost them more, it costs the end user more, which incidentally is why rents are going through the roof, because the cost of being a landlord is going through the roof. So, hey, that's the same with anything, isn't it? Not just finance, could be cars, could be anything. And what we've seen in the last few weeks is, whereas the 5-year swap rate, let's just use that as an example, we're hovering around about 4%, they've edged up into the 4.25, 4.5 region. So it's no surprise that the repricing at the minute is about 0.5% more of products going off the market and onto the market. Now, if you listen to the mainstream media, and I torture myself most mornings with the BBC, I don't know why, but the feeling they generate is, oh my God, we're all going to go poor literally tomorrow. Literally tomorrow, we might as well just turn the lights off and go, because 800 mortgage products are coming off the market. And this is because the swap rates are changing. There's about 15,000 mortgage products. So a little bit of perspective, it's just over 5% of change. But that's not new. Every day products come and go, but there's times when they do come and go a little bit more. So the swap rates have been moving about. As for 2 and 5 years, and what do you go for? Well, you do need a bit of a crystal ball, unfortunately. But you can try and put some kind of semblance against what's the right thing to do. But you've got to think about your own ambitions as well. So what if you're looking at a property in your portfolio and you think, do you know what, I've had that quite a while now. It's starting to get a little bit tired. If I sell it now, it suits my capital gains situation. You don't want to go and tie it into a 5-year fixed if you want to get rid of it in the next couple of years. Yeah, so that might be a better reason to choose a 2 over a 5, not what's going on in the market. And people don't think about these things, and that's what we try and educate our team of advisors to constantly do, is push the client into thought-provoking situations, because before they know it, they've done something that comes back to bite them in the ass. Right now, and again, no guarantees, but if it was me, I'd be edging for a 2-year fix or a tracker rate, because I do think inflation's going to come down. I do think that the cost of borrowing is going to come down. And it was interesting to see, back to the mini budget, how quite unprecedented 5-year fixed rates were cheaper than 2-year fixed rates. Now, if I put my cynical hat on for a little bit, I just think that was the bank's profiteering, thinking, we don't believe that these rates are going to be almost artificially high for very long. So let's tempt people into signing up to them for as long as we can by making 5 years cheaper than 2 years. And I think it's probably on the cards that locking in for a 5-year fixed rate during and towards the end of the mini budget fiasco is going to prove the wrong decision for a lot of people. Yeah. But the panic that was put into people, And we had it with clients, didn't we? For, I need a 5-year fix because they're going to go to 8. Yeah. And like Steve says, sometimes you just got to sit back a little bit, consider your own circumstances. Let's get rid of the noise. The journalists who 1 minute they're talking about the best barbecue and the next minute they're an expert on finance, aren't they? Yeah. Let's get rid of all that noise and let's have a look at what's really happening. And probably finally is look at the differentials. If there's a big gap between products, that's a factor. It's not just whether there is a gap, it's how big is that gap? And apply a little bit of just calm thinking and then go for it.
I mean, this is the challenge, isn't it? Is that when you've got the mainstream media with their narrative, it's never just a here's what's happening in the market. It's like everything's so much more dramatic, isn't it? It's like it's either massively doom or gloom, and it's all about clickbait, isn't it? Trying to get attention, because it's like social media these days. People's attention span with short form content. It's what's the hook? Everyone's talking about, I need to get a hook. We need to say something that's going to catch attention and have them to focus. And that's what the news is doing as well, isn't it? So,
Absolutely.
If they're just giving a non-biased conversation about something, that's not going to get the same clicks or same eyes on their outlet than it would be if they turn around and say it's a massive recession, absolute disaster. The markets, lenders, 800 lenders are pulling out their products, and you just put that in perspective when it's like 5% of the
crazy
products
thing
in
is
there.
they weren't actually pulling 800 products. They were repricing, and it's different. They're not disappeared. They're just going away and coming back with the new cost.
Yeah.
And it's not 2% higher. It was maybe half, 3/4%. But again, they don't give you that. But see, you started this with the word recession, didn't you? Yeah. And this has always been an intriguing one for me, from even probably doing my A levels in economics and my degree in accountancy and thing. And this word recession, it strikes fear into people, doesn't it? I'm going to lose my job because there's a recession. Yeah. Like, a recession might be as shallow as 2% for a period of time. It's technically a recession.
0.1 if it's two negative quarters.
Yeah, okay, 0.1. Yeah, let's stick with 2% even, because that could be the case. So if you're an economy, but let's just say Paul McFadden's there. Yeah, you've got 100 quid in your pocket, and I come in and I nick 2 quid out your pocket. Yeah, it's not good, is it? You've had 2 quid, you've lost 2 quid, but your fund has receded by 2%. You've had a recession and if that hopefully gives people a bit of perspective on these things. Now, if I took 30 quid out your pocket and it stayed away from your pocket for 2 or 3 years, that's no good, is it? And that would be a humongous recession, wouldn't it? But maybe, see the first scenario, that might have only lasted a few months, and in the end, I actually feel bad and I give you back the 2 quid because it's bounced back up again. And if you apply that as a percentage to what we're talking about, recessions don't necessarily mean property prices crashing into the floor or interest rates having to go sky high. Well, if anything, recessions would promote the rate coming down historically. And it doesn't mean that we're all going to lose our jobs tomorrow, because it's just a minor effect.
Even when there was the Great Recession of 2008, 9, 10, that kind of period, house prices didn't just crash overnight, and that it took 3 years or so for them to go from where they were in 2007 to the bottom. And it's gradual, isn't it? Just over time. And some areas actually weren't affected. Some areas the price was static throughout that whole period, and other areas, they suffered a little bit more, maybe 25, 30% or so. But when the press talk about recessions, and it could be a technical recession of such a minor thing like 2%, or often it's even less than that. And it's just 2 quarters, 2 lots of 3 months, negative growth. Yeah. That's all it is. But people panic because they're not educated. If they were educated as to what a recession was, and they'd been through enough of them, they would realise that actually there's nothing really to fear here.
Yeah. It's crazy how they call a property market crash a 10% drop in house prices.
Who decided that?
Exactly, exactly. And the crazy thing is, as well, is that doesn't happen overnight. Those that are going to get affected the most. I always tell a story about my first ever home that I bought. we paid £98,000 for it. It was only worth 85, so we overpaid. I did exactly what I tell people not to do, and that's get emotionally attached to a property. It's our first property purchase. There's a story behind it, as there always is, and we overpaid for it. So by overpaying, of course, as the market starts to correct, we get hit the most because we already overpaid. So that's something to keep in mind. And then that property, when it bottomed out, which it wasn't until like the end of 2011, get into 2012, so at least 3 to 4 years period of time, it dropped down to 75k in terms of its value. So of course it seemed like a bigger hit from us going from 98 to 75, but that's because we overpaid in day one. We had no value to add to that property either. So again, that's what we need to keep in mind. And for many others, especially when it comes for investment purposes, we kind of make our money by doing our due diligence, looking at the numbers, and understanding and realizing that you're going to be in and out of that deal if it's a flip or refinancing, normally within a 6 month or so period. So the market doesn't shift that quick for house prices just to drop. A 10% proper technical recession drop, and when it's classed as a proper recession, that's a good 12 to 18 months. And the problem is that what's the mainstream media focusing on again? Stocks, shares, crypto, volatile marketplaces where it's up and down like crazy. And because of that, and you hear that being dramatized the most, that's what then causes a lot of people think, oh my God, property prices are going to crash as well, and it's going to be a disaster and everything else. So we need to look at the fundamentals. I always go back to grassroots. We live in the UK. We've already got a massive housing shortage. We're not building enough homes, and we've got more lenders in circulation now than we've ever had before. And then keeping a pulse with estate agents to find out, are they getting enough stock themselves? Are they trying to fight for business? Is everything they've got going on the market, and there's still a demand there for people to buy and everything else? But then what's the funders doing as well? So from your viewpoint, dealing with lenders, you've got the high street lenders, okay, but then you've got the other more competitive lenders that've got more money they need to put into the marketplace. What's been their take, what's their viewpoint, and what you kind of seen in that market?
I can tell you one in particular, Skipton Building Society.
Yep, well, there you go.
100% mortgage, so they must be so confident of it crashing that they're going to go and do that, yeah? Again, no one's got a crystal ball, have they? But our property market has evolved as well in a different way, and it's the economic value of rent. So rents were always a much lower cost than what they are today compared to the actual value of the property. So although property's gone up over the last couple of decades in general, as we know, it's been on average, a relatively slow growth on your average property. So you're not improving it, you're not developing it. It's been relatively flat. Meanwhile, rents are going higher and higher. I think it's 12% growth last year and 11 the year before, or the other way around. But again, then you've got to look at regions. Some regions were even higher. Now, mortgages and finance are obviously an important part of houses, but only about a third of houses actually have borrowing against them. You've then got to look at the institutional money going into property, the foreign money going into property. But like you said, the fundamental of economics, day one economics when I did my A levels, demand and supply. And it's funny, listening to various economists. Now, there's one guy out there who I think he predicted the crash in the 90s, and he predicted the credit crunch crash. Fred Harrison, I think his name is.
So he created the 18-year property cycle.
That's the one, yeah.
Which I do like,
Yeah.
but as he even says himself, don't get attached to
No,
the time frame, but
exactly.
understand the phases.
Yeah. So again, mainstream media, a lot of people at the minute, it's going sour. 2023 is a sour year. Well, it's not been so far. It's not been great, but again, it's relative. Just because it's not going up 15% doesn't mean it's in turmoil. So that guy, for what it's worth, but like you say, he says, don't get attached to it. He thinks 2026 is the year to be concerned.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense because, what I'm seeing in the marketplace is lenders have still got a massive appetite to lend.
Yeah, so sorry, coming back to your point, I know we went to the 100% mortgage, but there's been a whole heap more 95% lending as well. There's been increases from lenders in terms of income and how they can maybe let it go, stretch a little bit further to support mortgages in one or two places. Now, they're not doing that if they believe that there's a crash around the corner. So I don't think anyone's sitting here saying, oh, like just after COVID, when we all had loads of money because we've not spent anything for God knows how long, people started going out wanting to buy property again and invest in property, and we saw some quite healthy growth, didn't we, in a year or two? No, I don't think anyone's saying that that's what the market's doing. But I think if you actually sit back and again you look at the data, it's 1 month it's up a little bit, 1 month it's down a little bit, 1 month it's nothing's crashing, or certainly not right now, and there's no signs of it. And I think the fundamentals, demand and supply, and these rent increases that are coming through. I mean, you know, properties with yields on them of 12, 13, 14%, and they're not even HMOs, which is where you would traditionally get that. This is your, you know, your two up, two downs.
Yeah, this is what gets me kind of when I look at the market. You know, I've not added to my buy-to-let portfolio for a long time because really for the last 6 years it's been bigger projects.
Yeah.
We still do flips, but not really added. It's hard. You maybe relate yourself, but you've been in the property game for so long, it kind of gets, and you've built the business so the team operate and run things. The thought of actually adding another buy-to-let to your portfolio, it's like, you know, come on, it's just a focus on the bigger stuff.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
when you start seeing rent get to the point that it is just now, you look at it and go, shit, like, hold on a wee minute. Actually then gets you to start to realise, and I used to always say in the various events, my jumpstart events or whatever, I would always say, look, you would need to buy, you know, 6 or 7 buy-to-lets to make this amount of net income. Well, now you probably get half that because the rent just keeps on going up, and then your property prices, of course, they have been going up, but at this stage is at just now, you're getting some great deals.
I went into property on the basis, this is a long time ago, yeah. It shows how naive you can be as well.
Long time ago.
2 or 3 years back when I was 21. I went into it on the basis that over the previous 50 or 60 years, house prices have doubled every 8 years. Yeah. So I thought, great. By the time I want to like hang my boots up, I'll just sell the portfolio because it'll be worth bumpkin billions, and I won't borrow any more against it, and I'll just make sure that I've always got that equity to realise. But I've now got a different mindset. I almost don't care about the capital growth or drop because I don't see it being my issue, but the kids' issue. Yeah. What I see is the rents keep doing this year on year, and I'm sorry to say, and I'm trying not to get political, but a lot of that is just through necessity, not through greed. I barely put them up for many years because I always had great tenants, still have, who've been there a long time. And you try and play the game, don't you? Not put it up too much, keep a good tenant, and so on and so forth. But with Section 24 and everything else, and mortgage rates, you're forced to do it. And now I'm looking at it thinking, Christ, I never thought that I would have a profit margin of rent above the mortgages that I've got today. And I've done nothing to achieve it other than just bide my time. So yeah, there's probably years when maybe I should have sold some and then gone back in at another time. But and whether it's just because I'm a bit lazy at times, I don't think so, but maybe I just can't be asked selling a house to go and buy another one and pay 3% stamp duty or what are you guys on up here now? 6, yeah. You know, there's a lot of growth in just the cost of acquisition that you've got to achieve to break even, haven't you? So
what I would say about the point before, I wouldn't say lending's tightening significantly, but lenders are being more cautious. So when you look at the underwriting process, it's taking longer now than it did do a few years back to get a mortgage through. So they are going through things with a fine-tooth comb at times. You've only got to look at the service level agreements with lenders and how many days to offer it's taking. And there's some cases that are going through and you're thinking, why are you even asking for that? Like, that's just crazy what you're asking for. It sounds like they don't want to lend, but I think they're just applying more caution in certain scenarios. But, and going back to the buy-to-let, the sort of margin, the positive cash flow that we talk about per unit, how that's grown, it might be a good time for our listeners here to consider buying portfolios, because when you look at when a lot of landlords got into the market, let's say the 1990s, around that sort of mid 90s, that's like not far off 30 years ago. Well, those people are getting ready for retirement, and they might be selling up not just one at a time, but they might be selling 5 or 10. And again, with the creative financial products that we've got access to, we can help people acquire portfolios with little money or with less money of their own. And then they're getting multiples of this, whether it's 250, 450 per month positive cash flow, like per property. And then it's a significant income on top of what they're already earning.
Yeah, it's quite interesting when I see the narrative is, oh my God, all the landlords, the distressed landlords, they're selling off the portfolio. Everybody's trying to get out of property. You know, why are you still? I'm like, come on, there's reasons, there's stories behind it. And first and foremost, you'll probably find that this is a crazy stat. So I spoke at the Scottish Landlords Association and I was speaking to one of the directors of SAL, and she said that on the books, 98% of all Scottish landlords, it's 95% in England, own only one property, one buy to let. So in Scotland, it's 97. So it's 3% that have got 2 or more, and in England, it's 5% that have got 2 or more. So you first need to look at, okay, there's a lot of people who are affected with clause 24, so they don't want to be paying that kind of tax. They were an accidental landlord in the first place, so they're offloading. Okay, so I can get that. There's those that just don't understand property, and what tends to happen where it's an accidental landlord or they've got a couple of properties is that they haven't maintained and kept those properties in order, because most of the distressed stuff that I see, it's stuff that's not been kept like well. It needs a refurb. They've let it just get run down, and they don't want to pour more money into that, so they're now offloading. So there's I've yet to see, unless you guys have seen, like a portfolio that's walk-in condition, being totally kept up to date, looking great, that you could just go buy. You know, it tends to be the exact opposite. But it's a good opportunity, I guess, with market sentiment, and for those landlords that are maybe tired and they want out, or you've got those that have just came to a point where they're of age where it's time for them to offload.
Yep, quite a lot of that coming through. Exactly that. And of course, when people are buying portfolios, and again, for experienced investors, this won't be new, but for people who maybe not got into property yet, that's where you can get some serious discounts against the capital value, because they understand that if they're selling 20, 30, 40, 50, God knows how many houses all at once, in various conditions with various arrears on one property without tenant and things, you know, that people are in effect buying a mess. Then against that capital value, they're not going to pay full whack for that to tidy up all that mess, which could be EPC ratings, it could be general repairs, all that. So, you know, 25, 30 and 35% discounts against true market value, not what the landlord selling thinks it's worth, and are more common than people realise. And again, with some specialist finance, that can mean that you can pick up quite chunky portfolios with relatively very little of your own capital.
Yeah. I found quite a few landlords who are selling up, especially here in Scotland, when you had the rent freeze, and now it's been restricted to only 3% rent increase. And that's for a moment. It's not like it's going to be like that forever, he says, right?
Yeah.
But with that in mind, a lot of the landlords I'm seeing that are selling up, they haven't increased their rent for many years. So they've got sitting tenants, and the reason why they're selling at a big discount is because they have sitting tenants.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are coming to me with these portfolios says, oh no, but how can I evict the tenant, or you know, how can I go and tell them they need to pay double what they're paying just now? Well, that's the reason why you're buying that property at a significant discount. There's a problem there. You know, there's work being done to the house. You know, so there's a strategy around that, working with the tenant and looking at a longer term approach, and being able to pick up these properties at big discounts.
Here's the thing. People don't want to double people's rent because they feel bad about doing it. It's inevitable that if that rent doesn't go up, they'll be losing their home anyway at some point, because it'll get sold, because it's not economically viable for either the current landlord or any new landlord to buy that property and rent it out at the old rent when taxes done this, rates have done that. So that rent's going up anyway. So people just need to get themselves over that a little bit and say, I'm running a business here. But actually, and what I've found is with the the tenants, some of them, well over 10 years they've been renting. They get it. They're not stupid. They understand that the rents have gone up because it's been driven to go up. Yeah, and I think if you're fair with people and maybe you don't just try and get them into an awkward position, then there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the game that we live in and we operate in.
Yeah, I think a conversation with the tenant as well is important.
Correct.
Because think about it, like some of these properties that you probably can't put the rent up because the house needs a bit of work done. And if you have that conversation with the tenant, look, we're going to put a new kitchen in, we're going to upgrade the windows, we're going to do this, that. And once we do that, rent's going to have to be this here. So just so you're aware that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And most of them, like, with absolute pleasure, I'm happy to pay more because we've been moaning at the landlord wanting a new kitchen and wanting this. Like, it's everyone just automatically just assumes the worst, I guess, without actually going to meet with some of the tenants, having a conversation and finding out. Because as you say, like, they've been renting there for so long and it's probably the cheapest house in the street and they know that they should be paying a lot more. And if the house gets tidied up and everything else and they want to stay there and then they tend to work with you.
Yeah. Again, with all these landlords exiting the market, again, the supply is dropping, and that forces the rents up. So it doesn't always have to be an existing tenant, does it? It might be that the first-time buyers, they've got the deposit, they're moving on, and good luck to them, great, So then you put the house back on the market, and what was $600 a month is now $850, and that's just because that's the market rate. But again, coming back to supporting house prices, if the supply of rental properties keeps dropping, naturally rents go up regardless because of the demand for rent, and that increases again the economic value of the house. So we've got this two-tiered thing in terms of the capital value of houses. You've got the excess demand for home ownership that keeps it stable, but then you've got the economic value of the rent going up all the time that just keeps lifting it as an investment value. Yeah. So it's difficult to foresee this crash when you've got almost two things supporting it. Not traditionally 30, 40 years ago, the rental market wasn't as huge as what it is now. And it was just the home ownership demand that supported the value of the bricks and mortar. But now we've got this investment value, haven't we? And that's getting stronger and stronger all the time.
So the next thing that you hear as well is that how's first-time buyers going to get on the ladder? How are they going to be able to buy and everything else? And you've spoken about this before. It's not the bank of high street lenders. It's the bank of
mum and dad.
Which is very different, isn't it, from what it used to be?
Yeah. So this, I guess, Steve is the smart one here, isn't he? With just the one little rug rat parasite. You and I have got three each that are going to come knocking on that door, haven't we? Yeah. It's a big part of it. It is a big part of it. And what else can they do? They can try and save for, I think it's on average about 8 years in London to accumulate a deposit without family assistance. And it's not just cash, by the way. This is the thing what people don't quite get. It's not just about mums and dads sticking their hand in the wallet or the purse and giving them the actual hard readies. There are products out there where we can lend against their equity to supply the necessary deposit, or they can support them on the mortgage as a guarantor, or they can temporarily put money in a savings account that after 3 years of them paying the mortgage, they get that back. And there's the 100% mortgage that doesn't actually need any guarantors in that. But the bank of mum and dad is certainly getting tapped more and more. And it's actually the bank of nana and granddad as well, or what do you call, what do you say, nana up here, or grandpas, grandmas, whatever. Yeah. So, and again, why not? And that might be equity release. And people think, oh no, I don't want a mortgage at my age. Well, you don't necessarily have to have a monthly payment with a mortgage. Equity release is a way of getting money out the bricks and mortar to give to your child or your grandchild without having to do that. Or even retirement interest-only mortgages. If they've got a sufficient pension income, they can extract a little bit of money with a very, very low payment to help support children. Because otherwise it is tough. If you're not on a a huge wage and you are renting and you've got increased bills, and we all know what's going on out there. It is hard to accumulate that cash deposit. But ultimately, you've got the 100% option perhaps if you have rented. And people go, oh no, you can't be doing that. House prices are going to crash and you're going to be in negative equity. And you're only in negative equity when you have to sell. Yeah.
And the product that you're on about, the Skipton Building Society product, that's 100%, it's a 5-year fixed rate. So if you think over 5 years, it's a capital and interest mortgage. So you're chipping away at that debt. That debt's going to be lower. In 5 years, you would think house prices are going to be at least what they are today. Even if we suffer a slight, reduction, they're going to come back and they're going to creep up. I mean, house prices have gone down, 3.6%, 3-point-something% in the last 12 months with all this negativity and mini budget fiascos and stuff. So even if they go down a little bit more, then, next year they might flatline, the year after they might nudge up a touch. And then if you're on a 5-year fix and you took out 100% mortgage for 200 grand, you're going to knock off at least 10 grand, aren't you, over the next 5 years, probably nearer 20 grand. So you're building equity into the property. And not only that, you've got the shared ownership or shared equity type mortgages where people can buy a portion, a percentage of that property. So you don't have to buy the whole 200,000 in that example. You can buy, between 15 and 75% of the value of that home, and then just pay a small amount of rent on the rest.
Yeah. What's crazy is that someone can go and look at a car, right?
Yeah.
They can look at a car and they don't go, oh, that car's 20 grand or 30 grand. I better have that cash to buy it. They go and go, how much can I afford to pay per month?
Yeah.
And you're buying something, you're going to put miles on, and it's going to be worth significantly less than what it is that you first bought it for, right? Doesn't matter how good the used car market's doing or whatever, the more miles you put on that, you're going to depreciate in value. But then when you look at property, even if the market does correct itself and you start to see, your house value going down, as long as you've got that affordability, and I use my own example again. So, when we were able to keep on paying the mortgage, at the time for the first year that we took on that mortgage, 95% loan to value mortgage, the 5% was borrowed money. So we had to borrow money to put down the 5%. And then for the first year that we lived there, I literally ate out in my partner's parents' house. We would come home from work to go there to get fed. We slept on a mattress for the best part of 6 or 7 months. We had bean bags as chairs, right? We didn't have broadband installed or nothing in the house because we couldn't afford it. We literally had a shell. It wasn't until the first year that we were able to start to gradually make it a home. And we were barely affording to pay the mortgage. We should not have bought that home. We shouldn't have. We were well out with our means, but we made it work. And that's the kind of idea. So as long as you've got foresight of affordability, of which eventually after the first year of getting into that house, which tends to be the challenge for most people. Like neither of us had parents that were able to support and help us as such. So we're trying to figure it all out ourselves. And I had this motivation to leave and flee the nest and to live in my own home. And it was a bit of a challenge. But then when you start to realise, it's like with anything in life, when you take on more responsibilities, you always tend to find out a way how to pay for things. I always say this is like you will work harder to keep what you've got than you will to get what you want. Because the thing that you want, you don't have it yet.
Yeah.
So you don't know what it's like to have to grind and work hard to make sure you keep on paying for it. So when you then take on a home, your own mortgage for your house, it may be scary at the beginning and everything else, but I'll guarantee you a few years later, when you look back, you're going to go, oh my God, we had some stressful times. It's a bit hard, the markets, what was going on? But we got there in the end, and look, it's done as well.
So here's the thing. So look, when the 100% thing came out, and hey, listen, even in the broker community, there was enough brokers going, this is a stupid thing for people to do. And I thought, how do you know? How do they know? So it's all if, buts and maybes. Now, when there's if, buts and maybes, you've got to look at the positives and the negatives, haven't you? And it was all, what if house prices drop? What if at the end of the 5-year fixed rates are, well, that's the same with any mortgage anyway.
Yeah.
So I thought, hold on, let's just put it in reverse a little bit here. What if they didn't take the 100% mortgage? Now, before we carry on, you've got to get advice and make sure it's right for you, yeah? But let's just look at the opposite. So let's go through the 5 years. So the average rent outside of London is just less than 1,200 quid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you rent for 5 years, paying that, and you're still trying to save this deposit that in London takes you 8 years, but everywhere else takes you that period of time anyway, you've actually just forked out over £70,000 in rent, so long as that landlord doesn't put that rent up on you anymore in the 5 years. Yeah?
Yeah.
What happens if house prices have maybe gone up 5% in that time? Just 5%. Could happen. Could go down 5%. I get that. But they could also go up. So that on a mortgage equivalent will get you a house of around about £220,000. So the average rent outside of London, the equivalent mortgage payment, over, I think I did it on a 35-year period, that's where it comes out at, £220,000 house. So if it goes up 5%, there's another £11,000 that you've missed out on. Come back to your point. You've paid off.
Chipped away at the debt.
Yeah. You don't necessarily need another 100% mortgage. So I know that's the rose-tinted glasses version, but no one does that.
No,
it's all just the don't do it, because this shit might happen. Yeah. What if the good shit happens?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're still renting 5 years later, and you still haven't got your deposit on average. And meanwhile, you've lost out on what you've paid off, the growth in equity, and sure as eggs is eggs, your landlord's put that rent up in them periods of time. So actually, it's going to be more than what I just said. And coming back to your point about affordability, that's the real key to it. And if there's one tip I can give to, because we're talking about first-time buyers now, aren't we, by and large, yeah? If there's one tip I can give to people who are getting out from under mum and dad's feet, or they're coming out of uni into the first house, or whatever the situation might be, understand about your bills, of course. Don't just go and buy a house like I did, actually, and go, shit, gas, electricity, what's council tax, all that kind of stuff. And we should spend more time educating kids in this country, but people do this. They mistime the finances. So let's just say someone goes and gets a 5-year fixed rate, and 2 years later they need to change the car, and they go and get a 5-year car deal. Yeah, but the mortgage is coming up for renewal before that 5-year deal is up.
Yeah,
you've seen this 100 times, haven't you?
Yeah,
1,000 times. Yeah, try and time your finances so that your car finance ends maybe just before your mortgage does. So then you can just sit back, wait to see what your mortgage is doing before you then go and spend on the luxuries again. Prioritize your finance.
So you're saying don't buy a Lamborghini Aventador before you're going to go to
So, so this is it, isn't it? So you were off last week, yeah. So I said to Paul, I said, me and you are a pair of dickheads, excuse the French. He says, what do you mean? I said, so I was out, I was out in Spain in August. I've had that BMW too long now. I need to, you got a new motor, haven't you? So it's all one of them. It's all peer pressure, really, and I'm just making it sound like it's a good thing. So I'm sat there on my phone while I'm on a sun lounger, looking at the Porsche website. And
market was doing well.
Market was doing well. We were. It was all booming, wasn't it? Yeah. So I phone up the guy, says, I'll have that. Give him the £1,000 deposit there and then over the phone. Not even seeing the damn thing, but you don't have to, do you? They're going to come out all right. And then got back home off holiday and took delivery of it. Then frigging Liz and Kwasi stood up and just basically killed it. I'm thinking, I've just bought a Porsche and I've tempted the market. I've tempted fate, yeah. And then, of course, so I was saying to him, no, he's gone. I said, well, didn't you learn anything? So obviously not to the same extent, but he's gone and bought his little Lambo there, hasn't he? And all of a sudden, we're starting to see 800 products come off the market and things. So one's on you.
So I guess that this is on the topic of what's going on in the world and everything else. We've just saw recently the US borderline defaulting on their debt.
It's never going to happen.
And then what happens? They write in to raise the debt ceiling
again.
Again. So it's just one big fucking game.
Yeah. Kick that can down the road.
It's just mad. And I guess that when you see that, and then you look at Fred Harrison, the economist, his viewpoint of 2026, it's kind of making more sense, isn't it? It's like, maybe there is something there. So my general viewpoint of the market just now is supply and demand is what makes a market. At the moment, we still have a shortage of supply. And even though there's deals to be had, because I can see that within our community, you guys are seeing it in the office with people who are looking for various types of finance and funding. So there's definitely deals to be had there. So there's deals to be had, but at the same time, we still in a market where we need more supply. And for that to happen, we need bigger businesses starting to fail. We need unemployment to start to increase. And that doesn't happen overnight. That happens over, again, a longer period of time. So where I see disruption happen in the market is really things such as robotics, artificial intelligence, things where skilled labor are no longer going to be required. And then when you start having unskilled labor, they're in a situation where they can no longer be employed elsewhere because they're no longer required because a robot's now doing their job, a machine's now doing their job, or there's not enough demand for their role, then they have to, then that's where they get support from the government. And then when the government has to support, those that require it, then they need to cut back their spending elsewhere. So this is a whole cycle that needs to play itself out. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a longer period of time. It takes lenders starting to be even more cautious, not giving 100% or 95% loan to value mortgages, reducing their loan to values, reducing their risk exposure as such. And then a lot of development funders starting to withdraw from the market. So there's a lot of this still to play out. And I guess it's one of those ones where we can be aware and observe the market, but be careful not to get caught up with mainstream media because they will think the worst of any situation, and then just intelligently making sure we're buying right. That's my viewpoint.
There's always going to be a time down in the line where there is a crash. Give it long enough, it will happen. And if people know definitely when that is, then good for them because they're going to make a lot of dough. Yeah. And that's the same with the stock market or whatever you're investing your money into. If you know when it's going to go up and when it's going to go down, well, you'll soon be on a beach somewhere, won't you, doing naffle. I think what's different with property, for me at least, is this. You look at the fundamentals of how banks and building societies survive, and that is they have to lend money. And when that demand is getting too little, then even if the pointers are a little bit dire, they'll start to turn the tap back on again because they need to keep the money going out the door. Yeah. And even when the worst of the worst happened, which was the credit crunch in the 2000s, they were still lending money. They might have been more choosy who they lent it to and things like that, but people get this impression of the shutters just come down, and they don't. No. Unless you get a situation like the Northern Rock or whatever, but they just don't come down because they can't afford for it to completely get shut off.
Yeah. And one of the best metrics to look at is the loan to value, like we talked about, the debt in relation to the value of a property that lenders are happy to lend against. And both in the term world, so in the mortgage world, we're seeing 95%, plenty of those, and the 100%. Not that long ago, it was 90%, wasn't it? 95s were off the market. And in the development finance world and the bridging world, we're seeing lenders that are comfortable with greater risk than they were 2 years, 3 years ago. They might be underwriting, like I said, a little bit more closely and just be careful who they lend to, but the loan to values have nudged up.
Yeah. So I guess to summarise this episode of the podcast, we've just got to look at the market as it is, become aware of what's going on in the economy, be mindful of mainstream media glorifying everything, go back to fundamentals. And one thing I always say is that you don't have a property business if it's cycle dependent. You need to know and have the right strategy so you can navigate through every phase of the 18-year property cycle. So, as always, if you've got any questions, pop them in the comments below. We'll go in there and respond and answer those as well. And as always, make sure you subscribe to the channel too, because we want to bring more content that's going to be valuable for you to help you in your journey as well, to understand all things finance and help you build, again, more of your portfolio and making more money in this property game too. So all the best and bye for now.